Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. Today with another Unified Minds deck. This time it's going to be an updated Blacephalon GX deck. So let's jump straight into it with the basic concept. And that is that we get to keep Ultra Space and we get to keep Treasure. We gain Cherish Ball, and that means that we can pretty much search out all the stuff we need to do with Blacephalon. So in theory, Blound stays pretty consistent post-rotation. It really, keeps its core and is still able to search out its main components, and that leads it to be, potentially a very strong deck. Also, the fact is, many other decks are reliant on Cherish Ball themselves, which probably leads to the format being relatively GX-focused. I think there'll be only a handful of non-GXs out there that function at all. So when that's the case, Blacephalon being, the one-hit KO merchant that he is, should probably be in a good spot, right? Because he can uptrade sometimes on tag teams, or he can at least trade evenly against GXs with, speed on his side, thanks to, his GX attack that you can do on turn 1. You have burn and confusion options to slow people down. All these things bode well for Blound. So I think definitely a viable archetype as we go into this format. Let's start off with the Pokemon. The only new card that I'm adding is the new Naganadel GX. Ultra Conversion allows you to discard an Ultra Beast in your hand, and then if you do, draw 3 cards. The reason why this is in here is, some supplementary draw throughout the game, but most notably on Beast Ring turns. This deck's win condition oftentimes is hitting, 2 Beast Rings at least, and if you're able to do that, you've been able to burst 200 damage into play via these item cards. Sometimes you also have Welder, sometimes you have Charging Ups, and that's how you push towards a knockout that's in front of you and also have enough energy in play for the last turn of the game, basically, is how you try and look at it. If you're trying to use Burst GX, if you're trying to use Mind Blown early, then the Beast Rings come, and then you're finishing off the game with like a Manual Attachment plus Charging Ups. That's normally how the deck tries to function, running off of Mind Blown the entire time. So if we just draw more cards on the turn we go into Beast Ring, we're more likely to hit more Beast Rings. So essentially this one Naga GX comes in to help us out on that crucial Beast Ring turn, and somewhat as well on the turns we get hit with Reset Stamp. Because obviously once you've taken these big knockouts, the opponent probably wants to stamp us down to a low hand size. So having this on board, especially if we can also stick Ultra Space on board at the same time, means we have good outs to still fill up our hand size and get into good shape. So this is a great stamp proofing mechanism, and also when we're trying to reach for Beast Rings, it allows us to draw 3 more cards, which is always a good deal. We then have 4 ofs of all the Ultra Beasts on the top line. We maximize these counts, not only, to maximize starting Blacephalon and all that good stuff. We also want to have a lot of access to these regular charging up Nagas, because they're, of course, a big part of our damage output. But also, we're playing maximum copies plus Ditto, so that we do have here and there a good Ultra Beast that we can discard. The 4th Blound oftentimes in your deck is a useless card. Sometimes the 4th Naga, the 4th Poipole, these can all hit the discard pile for us to draw a few more cards. So I like the very, very thick Naga line plus Ditto, because it then gives us that leeway to use Ultra Conversion when we need to. We're playing a Mew, of course we need Bench Barrier to help out against Pikarom, otherwise they can happily jump Beast Rings. Similar story if there's going to be any other spread Pokemon out there. So we definitely want to have a safeguard against that. Even things like opposing Naganadel GX is trying to Venom Shot onto your Dedennes and stuff, so this Mew is a nice include, especially when we have treasures to maybe scout it out on the turn we need it a little bit easier than some other decks. And then we play 2 Dedenne GX of our own. Dedenne Change is another great thing we can have on the Beast Ring turn. We get to Supporter, plus Ultra Conversion, plus Dedenne Change. We see a lot of our deck, and hopefully that means that we can access Beast Rings. And of course, we no longer have, the treasure synergy for Lillie and Marshadow that this deck used to have. So now it's more Cherish Ball Dedenne based. Dedenne obviously a great deal as well, because sometimes we can get Fire Energies into the discard pile to help Naga as quickly as possible, which is great. Onto the trainers. I've tried to keep as streamlined as possible, really, with the deck. Not trying to get too funky, just have the core essentials in here. So we literally just have the Ball Search, a couple treasures, to supplement the 3 Ultra Space that we have. 4 Cherish Ball, great for the Dedenne odds to get us into drawing cards, as well as, of course, our Nag and our Blacephalon. The 4 Custom Catchers to, grant access to the opponent's bench so that we can knock out GXs and tag teams. 4 Beast Ring, of course, a key component for our main damage ramp that we get out of the deck, as well as thinning our deck of all these fires. And 1 Heat Factory, another great mechanic that can help us draw more cards as well. Onto the supporters, again, it's all fairly simple. I've tried to keep the Blacephalon list as simplistic as possible and as close to standard as possible, really. So we have the double Lillie, 3 Welder, a pretty high count of Welder. I think with the amount of tag teams, it's just relevant to play 3 copies of this right now, and especially if there's going to be things like Mewtwo and Reshizard. If they're playing Giant Furnace for you, you can get immense value from your 3 Welders. And then there's going to be the 4 Cynthia as well in the deck, just for regular, standard, good old draw in general. I have lowered the Lillie count from previous builds. That's partly because of our reliance on Dedenne now. Sometimes you get into an 8-card hand and then still have to use Dedenne, which always hurts. And also because we have things like Custom Catcher and B-Strings that we hold on to. Lillie in the mid-game doesn't draw quite as much as something like a Refresh from Cynthia. My general reaction, really, to this format after seeing how much we need custom catchers and how relevant they are in our format, it's made me move less and less away. Like, I just care a lot less about Lillie these days because it feels like you hold on to too many more combo pieces. So Lillie in the mid-game is drawing you like 2 or 3 cards, and that always stinks. You'd rather just be Weldering instead or using Cynthia. So just a low count of the Lillie, still good on turn 1, but overall Cynthia sort of wins out in my opinion. Onto the energy, again, nothing you're unfamiliar with. 1 Beast Energy, 15 Fire, total of 16. Now we don't have a low and muck in the deck, so there's no real worries about like retreating something out if it's going to get trapped. Everything is a 1 retreat cost, so just don't end up filling your board with all your energies, either in like the lost zone, the discard pile, or like in play. Make sure you always have like 1 or 2 left, so your opponent doesn't just custom catch a pass and stall you out for game. That's the only thing you need to bear in mind, because we don't play any like switching options in here. Outside of just retreating energy cards, so do keep that in mind when you're like spamming B-Strings. If you do have those high roll turns of finding 3, don't completely rid your deck of energy cards unless you have some spare ones in hand, because otherwise they can custom catcher and just like pass into like Dedenne or something, and then you end up having to scoop. Onto the full list. As you can see here, 17 Pokemon, 16 energies. These are all like pretty standard counts for Blounds in previous renditions. Cherish Ball comes in to be a great help to really enable us to Dedenne. Like I said, on the B-String turn or on turn 1, these are both great helps. And overall, it just remains very similar to how it used to be. So you all should be pretty experienced with Blacephalon at this point. Onto tech options, there are lots that I've considered. I've tried to go like very simplistic and straightforward, but there are a couple of tech cards you could look for. If you want to add in the Psychic Naganadel GX for Stinger, it could really help you beat a Shedinja deck, because of course Stinger would put you down both to 3 prize cards, and then you can use your custom catchers for 2 more prizes, and yeah, that's going to get you very close. So you're hoping that you can continue the pressure to like close the game out with a Stinger. So I think you'll get real close to beating a Shedinja deck if you're able to Stinger. Then there's also the Turtonator that you could add in. It's a non-Ultra Beast, non-Fire type, non-GX. These are all good things for helping you get around all sorts of walls, be it like a Bronzong or a Keldeo or something with an Ultra Beast Fairy Charm. Turtonator gets around all of those, and he can dish out 1-hit KOs. So he may be worth a space if you are considering something like a Keldeo archetype being a thing, or any other awkward walls out there. You can have the answer. Currently, we don't. The only thing we could do against things like Ultra Beast Fairy Charms is just hit them with our Nags, because it only counts GX Pokemon. So we'd have a bad time against those things. Right now, we're not playing many answers. You could also think about playing Lysander Labs if you're worried specifically about the tool cards of Shedinja and of Fairy Charm. So yeah, that's also an option. On the top, you can see I'm not playing Reset Stamp. Once again, we are an aggressive deck. We want to impose our strategy. I feel like this deck, more than anything, its win rate is completely based on the B-String turns and how effectively you use those turns. And I think Reset Stamp doesn't help you in that regard. Oftentimes, the game could have already gone, like slipped away from you if your opponent has got to 4 prize cards. Or sorry, if they've taken 4 prize cards, the game could have already slipped out of your fingers if you've missed B-Strings. So maximizing B-Strings is probably more important than stamping your opponent down in those situations. Sure, you could argue, like, if you hit your B-Strings and the Reset Stamp, that gets you in a good spot, but ultimately I don't think we can rely on that too much. Giant Furnace is another option. Now, obviously Ultra Space is like completely busted in this deck, but it may be that Giant Furnace is even more unfair than Ultra Space. If you just go up to a higher count of treasures, add in some furnaces, and then you could even go up to like 4 Welder and just make that like a key component of your deck the entire time. It may be more unfair than an Ultra Space, which is a difficult thing to say, really. Psychic Energy could be teched in as a one-off into your list. The only way we can attack with Venom Shoot on our own Naga GX is with exactly Beast Energy. So if you wanted to, again, on that Beast Ring turn, you can like Beast Ring twice and get a Psychic Energy and like 3 fires onto your Naga GX and do like a sniping attack on a Dedenne or something that you've hit earlier on in the game. So that could be an option if you wanted to allow the sniping to be more relevant in the deck. Right now, we're just playing the 1, because I think there'll be a lot of Mute out there anyway, just for Pikarom and whatnot. Not that people will put it down against you, but sometimes that sniping could be relevant, and it's definitely something to bear in mind with this deck. You have to value the Beast Energy very differently now, because whenever you like put it onto a Clown, that's basically saying that you won't ever need to snipe, and you're relying on your custom catches the whole game. So yeah, something to bear in mind. And then there's some different engines you could go down. If you don't like the custom catchers, you could try and weave in Ninetales. The awkward thing about Ninetales is you don't really have space for crystals as well, so you'll only really get 1 or 2 gusts anyway, so it seems very similar to custom catchers. And then there's the option of Persian GX. If you are going to go down one of these like other stage 1 lines, I think Pokecom has to probably sneak into the list to try and make it relevant so that you can actually find things like Meowth early or Vulpix or whatever else. Catwalk is obviously a great ability. We've seen it in previous renditions of Blounds, but my biggest issue is like, how do you actually find this card in time? Sometimes there are going to be things like Reshizard and Pikarom. They'll be hitting you like on turn 2 for a knockout. 180 is not a difficult like baseline to hit these days. So they're just easily knocking you out like on turn 2. And at that point, like you'll probably have Poipoles down because it's so easy to find Poipoles because you can either treasure or Ultra Space them. But that means that you can get into like your Dragon Nag and get drawing cards. But although the Persian like guarantees more things, you have to really high roll into your Meowth on turn 1 to actually get any value out of it. And even then, you have to high roll into the Persian itself. Yes, you have Cherish Balls to make it easier, but it's the Meowth that's the hardest thing to find. So I think if you want to add in the Persian line, you've got to get pretty creative and try and work in some Pokecoms to make it worthwhile. And even then, like your board space starts filling up with lots of non-naggers, which is always a bit of a concern because you need those charging ups for the late game, especially because you have to go through so many tag teams in this format. It can be a big hurdle to get through. So I like having as many naggers down as possible, really. Onto the matchup overview. I think the tag team stuff is relatively good as long as you prepare yourself nicely for like Beast Ring turns. Obviously, there's things we can do. We can slow things down with Bursting Burn and whatnot. I would imagine Reshizard is playing Mixed Herb anyway, so it's not quite as good as it used to be. But it's still like you're going to try and uptrade on all of these decks pretty happily. I think Psychic Malawal would be more difficult than the others. They're usually playing Dawn Wings, which is always an issue to get around. Especially if they do it onto like your Beast Ring turn, it forces you to find all the Beast Rings and double custom catcher all at once, which can become a little bit awkward for you. Or if they're doing it late game with a stamp, that can also buy them like a way back into the game, which is a bit of a headache. And at the same time, they have things like Distortion Door and Spell Tag to get creative and maybe jump over Beast Rings altogether, which would be hell for you, to be honest. Shedinja at the moment is again one of these bad matchups. In many of the decks that I've profiled like so far, because I'm giving you like the vanilla baseline, I'm never having a good Shedinja matchup. So I'm letting you know the tech cards you could add in to make it better. Like if you just want to add in Labs or the Stinger GX, like it's not rocket science to ever beat Shedinja, to be honest. But like in my current renditions, a lot of the time I'm giving you the most straightforward baseline just to go off of. So I hope you appreciate that, like, I am respecting Shedinja as a deck for Worlds, and possibly it's worth teching for, but I'm just giving you, like, the straightforward shell, and it's up to you if you want to tech for it yourself. Whimsicott are always going to be awkward matchups. They have that Fairy Charm Ultra Beast, and if you're going to try and attack with your Naggers, sometimes you're not, you're two-shotting at best, and, like, you're flipping tails sometimes, so that's going to get really rough for you. Quad Keldeo as well would be pretty bad. You have the Naganadel army. There's 4 of them they have to get through. Keldeo can't one-shot your Naggers. So it will be a war of attrition, but I imagine if they are going to be full-on Quad Keldeo, they're probably playing lots of heal and other boring cards like that. Spiritomb Beasts I've put tentatively as an awkward matchup just because it is predominantly non-GX, and hitting 180 is really not difficult for that deck at all. So definitely something to bear in mind because they have, obviously, Hustle Belts and stuff. Rowlet Eggs is actually a bad matchup for you as long as they don't prize any parts of their Sceptile line because they can protect against Ultra Beasts, so that's a pretty awkward one there. And Aegislash I also think will be a slightly awkward one. I think similar to the Psychic Mally in many ways, they can try and get creative with their spell tags and whatnot and their custom catcher turns to jump B-strings, and then these 130 hit point Pokemon become just like so annoying to get through when you don't have that extra like boost of energy at some point in the mid game. You have to draw pretty well and have a lot of Welders to just keep going through these Aegislash, so that feels pretty awkward to me. So yeah, some of the non-GX decks are awkward, and also these annoying walls from Keldeo and Whimsicott. And that's basically my closing thoughts. We're a little bit worried about spell tags becoming more relevant. That can help a lot of different decks hop B-strings, which is really ugly for you. I also think there's just other non-GX decks. Like, there aren't going to be many relevant non-GX decks, I don't think, post-rotation. There's only a handful that actually like can draw enough cards to function. But the ones that do could all be awkward for Blounds. That's always been the case, really. And obviously bear in mind as well that there's the new Tapu Fini that can come into any deck. It's a colorless attacker. And it can just like one-shot your Blacephalon. So if Blacephalon is hyped enough for Worlds, people might start teching against it. So that's definitely something to bear in mind. Right now, though, I think a lot of people are expecting to see and play against lots of tag teams for Worlds. They seem to be some of the best decks out there just because the engines remain intact for the most part. For the likes of Pikarom, for the likes of Mewtwo, for the likes of Reshizard in general. These decks all seem to still be able to be pieced together pretty nicely compared to some of the other stuff that we've got left with. So if that's the case, I mean, we're good at uptrading, and that's always been Blacephalon's like main selling point. So you're pretty much in a good spot if you're going to be seeing a load of tag teams. So let that sink in. You do have to dodge and weave some awkward matchups, but at the same time, there could be some big rewards for Blacephalon players at Worlds. I still think it's a pretty reasonable contender and one that you shouldn't really sleep on. So let me know what you guys think about my list. It's once again a deck that I've not put a reset stamp into. Is that a mistake? I'll hear it all down below. Let me know what other decks you want to see in this Unified Minds meta, of course, the World's meta. So yeah, I'll hear it all down below, and I'll see you tomorrow for another deck. Cheers.